Hello and welcome to the Brutal Iron Gym podcast, where our goal is to cut through the BS and deliver the brutal truth about topics related to health and happiness. So today's topic is training, and this was actually a question sent in by a listener, and the question was focused around the differences of training frequency and recovery per goal. So if people are training for strength versus size versus endurance, how does that change how often they should train? And also their kind of like recovery focus or um, in general, like the question of training frequency kind of implies when you would be recovered to train again. But what I wanted to add that the person might not have thought of was the different focal points of recovery. So some styles of training you need to focus harder on sleep in order to recover. In some styles of training, you need to focus more on food in order to recover. So that is something that's actually a lot of people don't consider or don't think about, and it can negatively impact their recovery and or the results that they get from their training if they focus on the wrong type of recovery. So let's first start looking at hypertrophy, which is like muscle building. So hypertrophy is a fancy word for building muscle, and we're going to give you the typical details, kind of general recommendations, and I'll give you a couple exceptions because there's always exceptions. So we'll kind of do this for each individual goal. So in general, in bodybuilding, which is building muscle, and this would be true of anybody who wants to build muscle. You don't even have to be, a competitive athlete. You can be in any of the categories of aesthetic sports. So bikini, figure, physique, men's bodybuilding, classic physique, regular physique, that kind of stuff. So just if you want to build muscle, so you're training to build muscle, then typically you would want to train your body parts on average twice a week. Okay? So we would say in general about every 2 to 4 days. Now that frequency does, like if you do it every 4 days, it would be twice every 8 days, so it's not quite a week. And if you did it every 2 days, you might actually get it 3 times in a week. So it's kind of that general 2 to 3. So way back when dinosaurs roamed the earth, and I started lifting weights, in magazines and stuff, it was most commonly recommended that people would do like bro splits, is what they call them nowadays. But where like Monday would be chest, Tuesday would be back, Wednesday might be legs, Thursdays kind of shoulders, Fridays arms. And they would tell you to just train once a week. Well, that's very antiquated. It is absolutely not the best way to train. So you do need to train each body part at least twice a week to make good growth benefits. And the reason why is because your muscles, like when you lift weights and you try to create muscular damage, which is what we actually want to do when we lift weights, so our muscles actually grow and repair and become, bigger and stronger in the future. So that's typically what we're doing when we're training, is when you train, you're actually trying to cause stress and damage to the muscle. Then when you eat food and you sleep, your body takes the food, it repairs the muscle. And if you train in the rep ranges and timetables of hypertrophy, like muscle building, your body responds by making the muscles bigger. Okay, so we've done podcasts in the past about like rep ranges and time under tension. So let me get you that podcast number so you can listen to that. So let me see here. This is probably one of those things you want to have prepared before you start talking, but as you start talking, you find out it'll actually be useful. So podcast 214, titled Understanding Rep Ranges and Expected Results. So that's podcast 214. What that podcast will tell you is what is the correct time under tension, like when you're doing your sets of activity. So what's the correct time under tension to get the result of muscular growth? Then there's different time under tensions in which you want to get the response of like strength. And there's different time under tensions to get the response of muscular endurance. So if I just train every exercise for sets of 10 reps, that does not necessarily mean that the response I'm going to get is bigger muscles. Because you think of certain exercises that have a very short range of motion, say bicep curls. I can do 10 reps of bicep curls in pretty good form in about 15 to 20 seconds. But if I try to do 10 reps of squats, that's going to take a hell of a lot longer and more so like into the 30 to 60 second mark. And you're going to get different results out of that. So even though the rep range was the same, 10 reps on each exercise, the results you get will be different. So stuff done between 10 to 20 seconds where the muscle reaches maximum fatigue in 10 to 20 seconds, that's actually going to get a response of strength. However, if a muscle reaches maximum fatigue between like 30 to 60 seconds, that's going to get muscular growth and some endurance if you're up towards that 60-second mark. So it's important that you're aware that when you're training the muscle, okay, that you have the right rep range, which corresponds to the right time under tension for the result that you want. So people mess this up all the time. So they'll do sets of 20s on things thinking they're going to get bigger muscles or stronger, and it's not a correct time frame. So we want to definitely have that in mind. So as I go through and talk about all this stuff in this podcast, it is of the assumption that you are training under the correct time under tension for your goal. So if I talk about hypertrophy, building muscle, and I'm giving you the frequency of training every 2 to 4 days, that's with the assumption that you're training, like when you do train, you are in the right time under tension for muscle growth. If you're not, then that'll mean that your frequency and your recovery rate are actually different than what I'm recommending. So again, podcast 214 will tell you what are the time under tensions per goal. So make sure you train with the right time under tension, okay? So if you're doing bodybuilding, and that would typically be time under tensions between like 20 to 40 seconds. It could be up to somewhere around 62, not the number 62, but 60 as well. So we'll go 20 to 60 seconds, but you want most of your work being between 20 and 40. So usually kind of at the beginning of the workout, if you're just trying to like pre-exhaust or get a mind-muscle connection, 40 to 60 seconds is okay and actually really good because that'll make it lighter weight for you. Or at the very end of a workout, if you're trying to just kind of finish off whatever muscle has left. But you want the bulk of your work being between 20 to 40 seconds, okay? So if you do that, that means that you want to train each muscle group about every 2 to 4 days. So how would I pick, 2 or 4? So typically if I have a muscle that can handle more weight load and therefore it can accumulate more damage, then I'm going to need to rest longer. So you think of like the damage you get from dumbbell chest presses versus dumbbell lateral raises. So if I do lateral raises correctly, I'm going to beat up my shoulder muscle, which is my deltoid, which is like the cap of your shoulder. That is a much smaller muscular surface area than, say, the muscle of your chest, front delts, and triceps, which would be involved in a dumbbell chest press. Okay? So since the dumbbell chest press can damage more muscle, and we can definitely press a lot of heavier weight than we can lateral raise. So not only is the dumbbell chest press going to damage more muscle, it also damages it more intensely. That is going to take a longer time to recover from than lateral raises. Even if you do lateral raises to the most absolute badass ability you have, it's still less muscle surface area, okay? And since you can't be as heavy weight on it, you won't be able to cause as deeply and intensely the muscle damage as you can with a heavier weighted exercise, okay? So smaller body parts tend to be able to be trained more frequently than larger body parts. So that's what we do sometimes for people who want to kind of shock a small, weak body part, and weak in terms of size, okay? So if it's a weakness of theirs, aesthetically, that means it's too small. So if we want to get that to grow, we can actually increase the frequency and shock the muscle a little bit. So, for example, say a guy wants wider shoulders, so he looks kind of more impressive aesthetically. He can actually train lateral raises 5 days in a row if he wants to. He's not going to do that forever. He might only do that for 1 week or 2 weeks or even maybe a maximum of 3 weeks. But then he might take the 4th week and completely skip all shoulder work totally. What that does is by training higher frequency than recommended or even normal, it gives your body a shock the body all of a sudden says, holy freaking crap, like this muscle's getting destroyed, let's give more attention to it. And then before you would train it so overly loaded that you would get an injury, you would stop. Okay, so I've had clients before where it's like we helped one guy do a show, and he had an amazing physique. He would train every single day for 21 days in a row, and then he would only train 2 or 3 days on the 4th week of the month. So he trained 3 weeks all in a row every single day, and then the 4th week he only trained 2 or 3 days depending on how he felt. And what that did was I purposely controlled the volume, and throughout the 3 weeks, the volume dropped down and the intensity went up. And then the 4th week he took completely off, pretty much. The 2 to 3 workouts during that week were kind of like maintenance style workouts. So you were only looking to create enough damage to kind of keep what you got rather than trying to create more and more damage. What this did was, rather than what most people make the mistake of, is how do I find this perfect balance where everything is consistent all the time? We don't grow from consistency. So we grow from shock and awe and being pushed to our limits, and then letting ourselves kind of recover and regrow into those new limits. So what you want to do is treat your muscles the same way. Is too often people try to find this perfect balance, which is bullshit. We don't grow from balance, like I said. So for that program, the person, like the first week, they got through the training pretty good. The second week, everything started kind of getting like, oh, freaking crap, like my muscles are kind of sore, I'm getting a little tired now. And then the third week was like a gut check week, where everything got pushed to the limit, everything was right on the edge of about to being too trained, like too beat up, too damaged. And then all of a sudden we took the 4th week basically off. That allowed his body to recover from all the damage of the first 3 weeks and become refreshed for the start of the next month. So having a cycle like that was actually exceptionally beneficial for this person. It helped them grow very large very quickly, and what made it work well was their food was freaking perfect. So this person never messed up anything on their food, so we knew their recovery was relatively consistent in terms of like what could we expect. And therefore I was able to push to a limit because I had a better idea of where that limit really was. Whereas if people eat very inconsistently, it's hard to know how hard to push them, because if they take a day or two and don't eat well, they can get injured on a 3rd day. If the person is eating very consistently all the time, then we know we can push them closer to the edge, get faster results out of their training. So that's an example where that's very abnormal, is to train. We trained every single day, which involved all body parts being trained about 3 times a week. So, and that was a higher frequency than what, like we said, would be typical. But that person ate well, they slept well, they did everything right that allowed us to push their training to the maximum. So for most people, you're going to want to train each body part twice a week, okay? And an exception of that might be if somebody doesn't want to, like I've worked with bodybuilders in the past where they had dominant body parts. So like their arms were almost too big for their chest and shoulders, so they just didn't train their arms for a while. We've had people before who had really large legs but small upper body, or vice versa, and they wouldn't train, they might only train their legs, like say their legs were dominant, they might only train their legs one really hard time per 2 weeks, and then one kind of fluffy volume type workout every 2 weeks. So it'd only be one workout a week, and only one of them being very hard, like super intense. But over time, over the course of 4 to 6 months, it allowed them to better balance out. So that's what you do sometimes. If they're an aesthetic athlete, meaning that they're going to be judged based on balance, then the balance is very important. So therefore, they have to back off on training certain body parts, okay? So those are some exceptions to that rule of every 2 to 4 days, but that is generally the good training frequency if you're looking for muscle growth, okay, is every 2 to 4 days. Now, in terms of recovery, if you listen to podcast number 225, we talk about recovery, whether you need to focus more on food or on sleep. Now, this is very important, okay? Because, for example, strength-based athletes, so powerlifters, strongmen, people who like try to move up really heavy weight for very few reps, they don't burn a lot of calories during their training. They do burn a decent amount of calories during their recovery, but their overall calorie burn of their workouts is relatively low compared to somebody who does endurance training, say a CrossFit athlete, okay? So if you're strength related, your training style doesn't burn up a lot of calories, and it has more stress on the nervous system than it actually does on the muscular system. So they need to focus more on sleep than on food. So overwhelmingly, you'll see this more commonly in females than males, but it happens in both. And mostly in females, they're a little more sensitive to body fat levels. So it's happening in both males and females, but females tend to notice it more. But if they do powerlifting or strength-based training and they don't focus well on their sleep, they're going to eat a lot to try to feel like they can recover better, but they're actually just going to get fat because they're overeating their calorie burn. So even though they're training often, they're not training very intensely in terms of caloric burn. They're training intensely in terms of strength, but they're not training intensely in terms of caloric burn. So therefore, they don't get to eat that much more. So you'll hear sometimes people say like, oh, powerlifting makes you fat. Exercising can't make you fat. That's the dumbest thing in the world you could ever say, is how the hell does exercise make you fat? You're overeating for your exercise level. That can make you fat. So powerlifting or strength training does not make somebody fat. That's stupid. That doesn't even make sense. So please don't say that. What ends up happening is like we said, is powerlifting makes you tired. You eat food to try to get over being tired, and you're overeating your caloric needs. So that is why somebody gets fat from strength training, is because they overeat to make up for recovery when they should be focusing on sleep, not food. Okay? Now, with bodybuilding, hypertrophy work, food is more important than sleep. You need both. I'm not saying don't get both, but make damn sure you got your food in place. Okay? So if the muscles are being damaged, they need material to be put back in there to fix them. That material does not come from sleeping. Sleeping gives your body the time to fix the muscle, but what the hell is it going to fix the muscle with if you're not eating? It's more important to eat than it is to sleep if you do bodybuilding. Okay, if you had to pick one or the other, don't pick, do both. But if you had to pick one or the other, food is more important. Whereas with strength-based training, sleep is more important. Okay? So, now, what about strength training in terms of frequency? Okay? This is a little bit, has some asterisks to it, because when you do strength training, so let's think of a powerlifter or a strongman, okay? Something like that. And I don't talk about Olympic lifting often, but Olympic lifting, I'll give you guys attention here in a second. So powerlifting and strongman is more so in powerlifting, I guess. They're going to have the big lift, squat, bench, and deadlift, but then they're going to have accessory work where maybe they want to build an upper back, or they want to build, bigger triceps, or they want to build bigger legs. Well, that's technically bodybuilding then. So if you're doing an accessory lift to build muscle, that's actually bodybuilding. Okay? So for the lifts that you want to get stronger at, so the lifts that are like 20 seconds or less of time under tension, especially 10 seconds or less if you're doing like max effort stuff, okay? Those lifts can be done every 3 to 7 days. And that depends on a ton of differences per individual. So for example, the stronger somebody is, the less often they can go heavy on their big lifts, because their big lifts are causing more and more trauma to them. So if one person can squat 700 pounds and another person can only squat 315, the person who squats 700 is going to cause a lot more stress and damage to their body. Therefore, they wouldn't want to squat as heavy as often as the person who can only squat 315. Not that only 315 isn't super light, so I don't mean it that way, but it is a hell of a lot less than 700, right? So individual strength differences will factor into how often someone can lift. So for example, when I work with female powerlifters who are weak in bench press, okay, if they're struggling to bench press their own body weight, they can bench very often, sometimes 3 times a week. Because if you divide up all the muscles that are involved in a bench press divided by their body weight, each muscle isn't getting that damaged. So they sometimes have to train their bench way more frequently than they would their squat or their deadlift in order to bring strength up, okay? So how frequently you train a main lift for strength depends on your current strength level. So if you have somebody who's really strong, and they do a big heavy deadlift workout, their lower back can be fatigued and not fully recovered for over a week, anywhere between 1 to 2 weeks. So I have some athletes I work with, they might only deadlift heavy like once or twice a month because it takes them that long to get their lower back to truly recover from the lift. Okay. Then also, if they're doing heavy squatting, that's competing with the same musculature as a deadlift, legs and posterior chain. So that's another factor you have to get into. Okay, is so when we say frequency per lift, if I allow 3 to 7 days, and you would say, oh, that's awesome, I can squat twice a week, and then maybe I can deadlift twice a week. Probably not. At least not to each one being max effort, that's for damn sure. So you're not going to max effort deadlift twice a week and max effort squat twice a week. Okay, unless you're on the weaker end of the spectrum. So what they typically do is one of the days is going to be max effort, the other one is going to be like technique-based work. Or they'll call it like dynamic effort if they're going to work on speed and explosion. But generally you're going to have one day dedicated to maximum effort, like maximum intensity, and heavy stuff. And then the other day being more technique stuff. So somebody might squat twice a week and deadlift twice a week, but only squatting once heavy and deadlifting once heavy. Okay? So, and that would fit the mold of those muscles, okay, legs and posterior chain, being trained every 3 to 7 days. So if I squat on Monday, that's posterior chain and legs on Monday, then by Thursday, maybe I'm ready to do posterior chain and legs through deadlift rather than squat. So that's typically what we have people do, is they'll deadlift heavy once a week, squat heavy once a week. And this is general. Like I said, I have some people only deadlift twice a month heavy. So I'm just trying to give you guys some food for thought, okay? So what you would see is, how do you know how often you should lift and how heavy you should lift per lift for strength? Is what can you recover from in terms of making progress? So if I try to deadlift heavy twice a week, and by the third or fourth week, my numbers are going down, I'm super sore, my back hurts, I'm probably doing it too much, okay? So you need to be able to improve in your volume, improve in your weights moved. There needs to be forward momentum in your training, okay? So if you can move forward and make progressions in your training, then your frequency is good. If you're not moving forward and not making progressions, okay? If you're not beat up from your training, you're probably not training often enough. If you're not moving forward, not making progressions, and you feel like you're getting your butt kicked, you're probably training too often. So, if you're not making progress but you're not sore, you probably need to train more often. If you're not making progress but you're getting your ass handed to you, then you're probably training too often. Okay? Then, the whole idea of accessories is, am I doing my accessories? So after bench press, maybe I do dips, I do chest presses and tricep press downs. Well, if those are all done for like 20 to 40 seconds of time under tension, then that falls back into our hypertrophy, our muscle building ranges, okay? Where those can be done every 2 to 4 days. So it does get layered, but if I don't tell you guys this, I'm doing you a disservice. So this can seem confusing, but I would rather have you be confused and exposed to the truth than oversimplify, let you think that you know exactly what you're doing, but it's not complete. So I don't want to do that to you guys. So, for example, if we know if you're strong in benching, okay, and you can bench, 1.5, 2 times your body weight, or even more than that, then you're probably only going to want to bench heavy once a week. But you can do your accessories for bench twice that week. So that's why sometimes in powerlifting you'll see people do like a heavy bench day, and then followed by like their bench accessories, like say dips, chest presses, and tricep press downs. And then 2 to 3 days later, they're going to go ahead and do like a light bench workout, or they'll do overhead press, or they'll do something to substitute out heavy benching, but then they'll still do all their bench accessories, the dips, the chest presses, and the tricep press down kind of stuff. So you want to do your accessories if they're focused on hypertrophy twice a week, but you might only do your main lift once a week. Okay? So, and in sense of powerlifting and stuff, if you're doing a blend of strength-based training and a blend of muscle size training, then your recovery is going to need both food and sleep. Okay? You need the sleep to recover from the heavy stuff. You need the food to recover from your accessories. Now, what about Olympic lifters? Like I said, if you're doing pure explosive work, okay, you would say, like some people would think you might have to be less often if it's super intensity high percentage work, but often Olympic lifts don't have any eccentrics. They don't cause a lot of muscular damage, and they're highly technical. So usually Olympic lifts need to be trained more often, almost every day or every other day, in some variation of the lift to make sure their technical proficiency is really high. So Olympic lifting is way more frequent than every 3 to 7 days. So if somebody would want to be very good at clean and press, or clean and jerk, they're not going to do it once a week. They're going to do it way more often than that. Okay. Now we're getting a little bit long, so I want to hurry up and blitz through muscular endurance to make sure we introduced everything in this podcast. And then if you guys have any more specific questions, you can always follow up with an email. So muscular endurance. So say you're training to just be better at body weight strength, so push-ups, pull-ups, like body weight squat stuff. You just want to be fit, but you don't care if you get bigger muscles. You should care if you get stronger. So I'm answering a question based on something I don't 100% believe. You should strength-based train regardless of any goal whatsoever. There should be some strength-based stuff in there. But for the stuff that you do that's endurance-based, where it's like it takes 60 seconds or more, okay, and you're trying to just get better endurance at that activity, okay, is you would train that every 1 to 3 days. Some people are going to train it less often, and that's okay if they're just working to maintain their ability. But if you want to improve your ability of endurance, you have to do it more frequently, which is you're doing it every 1 to 3 days. Okay, and it depends on total activity volume. So sometimes I'll have people come in and they want to be relatively strong in regards to their body weights. They want to be good at like push-ups, pull-ups, and like good at moving their body weight around with their legs. But they're runners or they're endurance athletes on bikes. They do Ironman stuff. They do a whole bunch of other volume of things. Then they might not train every day. They might train every 3 days. But since they have so much other activity, that every 3 days is appropriate. If they're not doing all that other stuff, so say they're getting ready for the military and they just want to be very good at moving their own fat ass around, but they're not doing much else. They're doing some runs and stuff, but they're not doing freaking Ironmans or anything like that. Then they're going to train more often, okay, more about that every day or every other day kind of frequency. And so it kind of depends on your total activity volume other than your training. And it also depends on whether you're trying to maintain your ability, which means you can train less frequently, or you're trying to improve your ability, which means you have to train more often. Okay? And recovery for that is usually more food related. Sleep is important, like we said, but it's usually more food related. So often one of the reasons why endurance athletes don't make significant improvements is because they undereat for how much freaking activity they're doing. So their body doesn't have anything new to build anything with or repair anything with. So they're often talking about like, I train all the time and this and this and this. I never really get any stronger. Well, first of all, you probably do everything out of the strength time frames. You probably do everything under an endurance time frame. So no shit, you're not going to get stronger. And then typically they undereat. So they're not giving their body enough fuel to actually have excess to create new muscular or new strength with. So endurance athletes, the biggest mistakes they make is training outside of the rep range for strength or time or attention for strength and not eating enough. Okay? So hopefully this was a good kind of rundown and gave you guys some ideas and some thoughts that maybe you can use to improve the accuracy of your training. So make sure you're aware of your time under tension. I think we said that was podcast 214. So make sure you're training at the correct time under tension for what you want your goal result to be, okay? And then hypertrophy, like we said, is every 2 to 4 days with some exceptions. Strength training is every 3 to 7 days per strength-based lift with some exceptions. And then endurance is once every 1 to 3 days, depending on some exceptions and stuff like that. Okay, so hopefully this gave you some good insight. And if you have any questions or you would like any help on creating a layered program that has all these factors properly addressed, of course, we're happy to help with that. So you can email us at brutalirongym@gmail.com. Okay, so hopefully this gave you enough to where you can kind of modify your own training and get better results. But then if you want some help, we're always happy to help too. Okay, cool. So if you like this information, you can find more from us on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter at Brutal Iron Gym. Also, if you like the podcast, please share it with family and friends. Please, please, please. The more people we help, the happier the world will be. And if you have any questions, feedback, or suggestions, we'd love to hear from you. So this podcast is for you. So